Hello everybody, today we're looking at sound and music. Some of the groups may have already covered some of this delivered as a PowerPoint presentation, but it never hurts to do a recap, and for those who haven't had this, it's an invaluable source of initial information. So what we're going to be looking at here is how to use an audio source component for background music initially, then we're going to look at how we can use the same component but for sound effects. They're used in a slightly different way. Then how we can use a sound effect to play when the game is started. Primarily in this case it's going to be some random sound effects that an object is going to make or an enemy. Then we're going to randomize that sound effect so they're not all making the same sound effect. In the case of many zombies in this instance, we don't all want them making the same sound effect, we want that to be different. And then finally playing a sound effect when an action is triggered, in this case when a gun is fired. So that's what we're going to be doing in this short presentation. I'll try and keep it under half an hour. Let's see how we go with that. So what we've got here is our scene that we've done. This is the AI tutorial. I've just carried on from that. All I have added though is I've used I've got a piece of music here which is called Instinct, and that sounds like this. That piece of music is going to be our background music for this game. That's taken from bensound.com, which is an invaluable source of free music, but the asset store as well is really populated for sound effects and music. And of course, sound effects you can make your own. If you're a talented musician or you know someone who is, you're welcome to use the music that you can create, generate or access, or alternatively you can use any source of music freely. So for when it comes to your projects, you're not bound by copyright. You can use music freely, but of course when it comes to the design, planning and documentation, we'd have to write about the legal ramifications of that, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail. So I've got a piece of music here. What I've also got is some zombie sound effects which can be found on Moodle. On the Moodle page, if you scroll down under the tutorial section, so there's our videos, if you carry on scrolling down you've got these tutorials. I've got the audio in interactive media PowerPoint, which many of you have seen but not all of you, and then I've got the sample sound effects for zombies, which is what we're going to be looking at, or what I've already pre-downloaded and installed into this project. So I've got that sample sound effects, and I've got a number of sound effects that sound like this. There you go, beautiful. And this. I think you'll agree those are perfect in every single way. So I've got some sound effects and I've got some music, and I've also got some other elements we're going to look at today. So first things first is I want some background music playing in this game. So I'm going to use this audio file here called Instinct, and we're going to have that play when the game starts. Really simple to do. Now I could drag that onto the player and have that affect the player directly. That would be a completely valid way of doing this. But what I think is better is I've already got an object in my game called Game Controller, which if you've been following along with the other tutorials I'm using to keep a record of my score, or if you don't have a game controller you can make one. There's nothing special about it. It is just an empty game object. You can do that by right clicking in the hierarchy and creating an empty, or you can go to game object, create empty. Does exactly the same thing. An empty game object is just a game object with only a transform component. That's all it is. So I've already created an empty game object, changed its name, and I've given it a score component for one of our previous tutorials. You don't need a score component. But all I'm going to do is recycle this game controller, so it's now got one extra job, which is to take this Instinct piece of music. And if I drag and drop that over here into the game controller, you see I'll get the blue line to say I can add it. And if I let go, it will add an audio source. Now an audio source component has a number of settings, and you can see it's already assigned the first thing here, which is the audio clip, which is Instinct, that piece of music we've already got set. It's also got a series of settings, but the most important ones are play on awake. Do we want this piece of music to play automatically when the game starts? Yes, we do. Do we want it to loop? Well, if it's background music, I imagine we probably would. And some of the other really important settings here are spatial blend. What this does is whether it's treated as a 3D source, as in there is it emits sound from a particular location, or do we want it to be a consistent volume at all times? By default, slid all the way to the 2D slider is it's treated as if it's background music and it's everywhere at the same time. Consistent volume, perfect for sound effects. But when we're going to deal, perfect for music. When we deal with sound effects later on, we would grab that slider and move it all the way to 3D. Okay, we don't care about the 3D sound settings on our music, but we will care about that later on. So that may be minimised, that may be maximised. There's a little arrow to change that, but for now we don't really mind. So now when the game loads, our game controller will tell this audio source to play automatically, and it will play when the music when the game loads on awake, and it will loop forever. Is what we should see. Let's see if that's the behaviour we actually get. It's just quickly reloading. What you'll also notice while this is loading is I've got a particularly ugly asset space. We're going to tidy that up shortly. That seems to be working. Hopefully you guys can hear that audio coming through reasonably. So that's how you set up a piece of music, as simple as that. You've also got some other settings that you can change, such as the volume. You can fiddle around with the pitch, but I don't recommend it unless you really know what you're doing. You can make it go really squeaky or really deep. You can have some fun with it. You've also got the stereo pan setting. If you know that you want to feed to the left or to the right speaker, you can have it feed from the left and the right speaker, but that's not usually what we need. In the middle is probably exactly what we want. What we also want to do is to have, in this case, our zombie. Excuse me. I've got an object here that I want to emit sound. Now you could have a fire and you want that to emit a fire sound, or you could have, in the case of our gun, which we're going to do in a little bit later on, make a bang or something like that. But for now I'm going to choose this zombie and I'm going to do the same trick that we just did. I'm going to go and find our audio. So in this particular example it's called sample sounds, and I've got a series of sound effects here. I could drag and drop that onto the zombie just like I did, but the alternative way of doing that is to add a component of type audio source and then dragging and dropping the sound effect that you want it to have into the audio clip slot. It does exactly the same job that we just did. Now you will notice that your zombie and our game controller both have these spheres around them. They're called gizmos. Anything that draws a helper tool like that is called a gizmo. Now what you'll see here with our audio source is it has, under the 3D sound settings, which we now care about, a minimum distance, so the point that it is at its loudest and will get no louder, which is 1 meter, and you can see that's represented by this sphere, and then a max distance of 500, which is half a kilometer. So if I zoom out, there you go. That sphere there is the range of that audio clip, which is balmy, absolutely too far. So what I find works is changing some following settings. We do want it to play this sound effect when it loads. That's reasonable. We probably don't want it to loop. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but in my case I don't. But what we also want is the spatial blend to not be 2D. We want that to be all the way 3D. And you'll see this little green line change. I also find that a max distance of 500 is ridiculous. I'm going to try a max distance of perhaps 20. Remember that this is in meters. So 20 meters is still a fair old distance. Probably, for those people working in C8 and C9, probably double the width of C8 or C9. I think it's 10 meters wide, so it helps give you a bit of a ballpark figure for how big that measurement is. So I've just changed that to about 10, about the width of C8 or C9. But the other setting I want to change, and you can see it represented here in this graph, is that once you get to 10 meters, it doesn't get to completely zero volume. So here's your volume, and I want it to. So I can either change that by moving that point to there, and then you can see it's got like a weird little dip as you get further away. Or my personal preference to this is, rather than having logarithmic roll-off, which is this smooth curve like this, I'm going to change that to linear roll-off, which looks more like a straight line, and that means that within 1 or 2 meters it is maximum volume, so within that range it's maximum volume, and then it trails off in a straight line. The further you are, the louder it is, and that's just a consistent linear value. Let's test that works. So our music is playing, and I could hear it play its sound effect. It played it once, and then it stopped, and you could hopefully hear as well that it was coming from that singular point. That's all well and good, but if I've got multiples of these zombies, so with it selected, I'm going to hold down Control D to make a duplicate, whoops, Control D to make a duplicate, and Control D to make a duplicate. Just with 4 zombies now, they will all be making the same sound effect, which is not very good. There's something I didn't need to hear at 10 to 9. But there you go, you've got all of those making the same sound effect, and that isn't perhaps the best thing that we want. So if I go through our list, what we've got so far, we have used an audio source component for background music, and that was exceptionally easy. Audio source component for sound effects, we've seen how easy and straightforward that is, but now we want to get it to play through code. So there may well be times that we want to have a custom script that can be modified to happen when code is fired. Just like, if you followed along with the tutorial so far, we wrote an enemy follow script in the AI tutorial that spoke to the NavMesh agent component. We're going to do the same thing now. We're going to write another script that will talk to the audio source component and override what is in the audio clip. Okay, so I'm just going to roll back, so I'm just Control Z all the way back, so we've just got 1 zombie back in our scene. We can deal with 1 zombie really straightforward. Add a new component. I'm going to call this play SFX, and our play SFX script is all it's going to do is make it so we can control this through custom code. As always guys, if you find that it's not auto-completing, edit, preferences, external tools, and make sure it's set to talk to Visual Studio. So external tools, make sure it's talking to Visual Studio, otherwise it won't do the autocomplete for you on any machine that you're on. So I've written the script called play SFX. Let's open it in Visual Studio and let's see what this does. We're going to create a series of publicly visible audio clips, and we're going to have that play in the start function, this bit here. So we don't care about the update loop, so I'm actually going to delete that. But what we do care is on about line 6, pressing enter a few times to give us some space. I want to create a publicly accessible audio clip. And I'm going to call this audio clip something like SFX1. There we go, it's our first sound effect. And then I want to duplicate this for sound effects 2, 3, 4, have a list of them, have a couple of them. While I'm here, I'm going to teach you a handy dandy Visual Studio trick. I could select that, copy it, paste it, change its name, but I'm too lazy for that, and I'm going to show you the shortcut. If I press Control D to duplicate, it will take the line you've currently got selected, completely copy it, completely paste it underneath, and that can be a bit of a time saver when you're doing leg work like this. So let's assume we want 4 sound effects. Because they are audio clips, that will create slots for clips to go in, and because they're public, that means Unity will be able to see them. I've got my little star up here telling me it's not saved. Control S, back into Unity, and make sure that is working as expected. All I should see in this script, it's not going to do anything exciting yet. We've not told it to do anything exciting. All we're going to get it to do is to have it so we can have a series of audio clips in here. If I scroll down, there we go. I've now got my play SFX script, and it's got SFX 1, 2, 3 and 4. If I then wanted to, I could go into my sounds with my zombie selected. I could drag and drop in those as different sound effects that I wanted. Now so far this script doesn't do anything. It literally doesn't do anything apart from just hold however many SFX blobs that we've got in there. But in the start function I could say go and get the audio source attached to this game object and make it play a sound effect of my choice. Play number 1 or number 2 or number 3 or number 4 or whatever combination you've got. So get component is probably the most useful line of code I will teach you on this course. Get component of type audio source. Notice not audio clip, which it's tried to default to in my case. Audio source. And then I want to set the clip to equal, oh, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, I don't really care at this stage, just say go and play number 3. That's the instruction for get it ready. To tell it to go and play is rather unsurprisingly, go get the audio source again, dot play. And because it's a function, it should look like that. I just want, so what that will do is say game loads, go and pick the third thing from that list, and then go and play it. While we're here, let's just show you other things the audio source can do. So I'm going to Control D to duplicate that, but this time, if I do dot, I've got a bunch of settings here that you may find useful for more powerful stuff. So I've got play, which will obviously go and play it. Play delayed. What that does, plays the clip with a delay specified in seconds. So that can be useful if you want to pause between having your script execute and actually having it play. Play one shot, plays an audio clip and then modifies the scale. It will only play it once, play on gamepad, play scheduled, and a bunch of other settings as well. But different types of play can prove very, very useful. You've also got things like mute, or you can change the volume, or that kind of thing. But this is what we care about. So for testing, what is in this script will override whatever my audio source is doing. So I've told it to play the patrol one. However, what it will actually do is the game will load whatever's in SFX3, the longer grumble. It will actually play the long grumble sound effect instead, and we can test if that is working by keeping an eye on the audio source, and you can now see that the clip is now playing long grumble rather than the default one, which is patrol. It overrode it. Now that's not particularly useful as an example right now. That's more a code example of showing you how you could do this kind of thing. What is a far more useful thing to know is how to use that .play instruction, how to use that to change the clip, and we're going to look now at how we can make this more random. So that's how we could get it to play on start. But now we want to randomize it. So to randomize it, I no longer want 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 sound effects. I'm actually just going to have a single sound effect now. This is all going to break. But I don't want a single sound effect. I don't want one sound effect. I would like one single list of sound effects. In programming, we call these things arrays. They're denoted with square brackets, open and close square brackets. So that's now to be read as public audio clip array. That's how you've got to read it in your brain. This is a public audio clip array. Think of array as to means list, and then I'm calling that array, that list of things, SFX. Now if you want to go through a list of things, an array, they are slightly different things for people who really know programming, but I'm keeping it simple. If I want to get the third thing in that list, I will now say the name of the array, which is now just SFX, and then I can get the element ID. So if I put square brackets and put a 0 in there, that will get the thing element ID 0. If I put a 1, it'll get element ID 1, and so on and so forth. What this means for us, if I save that and go back into Unity, is what you will now see is it's no longer giving me a big block of all these different sound effects that we can put in, and it's actually just giving me a number. In this case it's giving me a 0. Or you can click this little down arrow next to it and it says that the list is currently empty, but I want to have, oh I don't know, 10 sound effects. Enter. And now I've got a list for 10 sound effects. There you go. Oh, this is a tedious job, but you get the idea. You could do this. Drag and drop them in, and perhaps you've realised you've got too many and you only want 5. There you go. You see how that got rid of the other ones. Important thing to know about computers is computers start counting at 0, not at 1. So the first thing in the list is element 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So the 5th element of this array is called element number 4. The first element of this array is element number 0. This gets a bit confusing fast, but always remember that we start counting at 0 when we're dealing with arrays. So what I've now got that I can do through code is what this line of code is now saying is go and get the second element of the array, or element number 2, which is not the second element of the array. Element number 2 spotted is the 1, 2, 3, third element of this array. You get the idea, it's the third part, but it's called element number 2. That's not useful at the moment, but what does make this useful is we can make that number a random number. Rather than it being a hard-coded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we could say go roll a dice, and whatever that dice rolled is what we care about. So let's go and do that up here. I'm going to create a random number. So I'm going to create an integer up here just at the start of the start function. I'm going to call this random num, and I'm going to set this to random with a capital R dot range. Now there are two different types. You've got random range here, and it's given me a little warning to say this is depreciated. It will work, but it's the old way of doing things. It's no longer the proper way of doing it. So if I instead choose the one that says range, it tells me how to use it. Random.range, and then open and close regular brackets, the range of numbers that I care about. Now I could say roll me a dice between 0, and 10. Semicolon to say that I'm done. Perfect, that will roll an 11-sided dice and generate a number between 0 and 10. But I don't know how long my array is. It's 5 elements long, so I could say between 0 and 5. But then if I go and add more sound effects, that gets really, really messy, and I've got to keep it up to date. So we can be really clever here. I'm going to say create a random number between 0 and the array's name dot length with a capital L. However long the array is, generate that random number for me. So now, rather than always setting it to whatever number 2 is in our list, set it to whatever the random number is. So roll a dice, remember what that number is and store it in the variable called random number, and now go and set it to that random number and then go play it. What this means, hopefully, is if I make a number of duplicates of this zombie now with all their different sound effects, I'm going to make a copy and paste, a duplicate and a duplicate and a duplicate. What I would expect to see now for all of these zombies is that when the game starts, it will pick a different audio clip for each one. So to prove that this is working, I'm going to select all of the zombies, I'm going to set their audio clip to nothing, and then the script will pick one of these 5, and they all hopefully should be different. So let's keep an eye on this one to start with. So that's playing the wretched one. This one is playing Wondering, you can see it over here. This one played Patrol, and this one played Wretched. It just so happened that they picked the same one. Now, we could, if we wanted to, select all of those and on their audio source tell it to loop. That would be fine. We could make this more complicated, but this is a simple example for now. So you could also use this to randomize the volume of each one so they're not all the same, or you could tell it to, using that play delay, you could tell it wait a little bit so they don't all start playing the same, or playing sound effects at the same time, so they're all slightly out of sync, which is probably good. But you could see there a very, very simple line of code, or 3 lines of code, 4 lines of code if you include up here, for generating a random sound effect, which is very, very useful. The last thing I want to go through is the final bit here, playing a sound effect when an action is triggered. In this case, we're going to give our character a gun, and they're going to go and defeat these zombies. I've already got a 3D model of a gun in my scene, and the previous tutorials that we'd created had got the shoot script attached to the camera. So if I go into the main camera, you'll see that I've got my shoot script, which is there. I'm going to move it from my camera onto a gun. So I've already got a gun from the asset store, which is a Lee Enfield rifle. So I believe that's in the folder called weapons. I've got a 3D model, sorry, that's my sound effects for the gun. There we go, I've got a weapon called Enfield, which is in OS weapon, blah, blah, blah. So this weapon, if I drag and drop that into the scene, you'll notice the gun's probably a touch too big. As in, ridiculously too big. If I just put that gun in the scene, it's just a 3D object like any other 3D object. And you'll see it's a particularly big weapon, and it's not following the player around. So a couple of things to do to line this gun up and get it where you want it to be. I'm going to snap the game window over here. So obviously through here I can see what the player can see. I'm going to position the gun in front of the character, and I'm going to use the scale tool to scale it down to a much more reasonable size. It's hard to tell what the correct size is, but keep an eye on the game window, play it a few times and then line it up. You'll also notice if I play the game now, the player will just run away from the gun. The gun is just attached in space but not attached to the player. So you take your weapon and you would grab it and you would drag it to the main camera, not above it where you get a blue line, or below it where you get a line, but actually on it where you get a greyed out line. That will make the weapon a child of the camera, so whenever the camera looks up, down, left and right, or follows the player around, the rifle or the weapon should follow as well, which is the behaviour that we see. Apologies for shouting over zombies. I think it's probably better for now if I select all of these zombies and I reduce the volume of their zombie noises. There we go. So you can see we've got a weapon in place, but we want that to go bang when we shoot. I've currently got my shoot script attached to my camera, as I said, but I don't want it there anymore. So I'm going to right click and remove that component. Or if you're new and you've done this as a completely separate tutorial, you will write a shoot script. Have a look at the first tutorial I did, which was the FPS tutorial one, to show you how to do that. And then I'm going to instead get this shoot script and attach it to the weapon instead. There is something very important to keep in mind when you do this, is the direction of the weapon matters. Not all 3D models from the asset store will have their forwards, as in where the barrel of the weapon is, along the right axis. So in this case, blue is the correct one. Blue is forward. I want it to go along the blue axis because the script that we wrote previously said create a ray forwards in the forward direction of the gun. But not all guns are made pointing forwards, so it's just an important thing to keep in mind. If it's not pointing the right direction, give someone a shout and we'll show you how to solve that particular problem. So now what we expect to see is that gun will be able to shoot the enemies. Now I don't really care about them shooting the enemies today, that's not what the tutorial is about. This tutorial is instead about getting this gun to shoot and make a sound effect. So I'm going to expand the shoot script that we've written previously, and to do that we've got to make sure that there is an audio source component on the gun. Anything that needs to make a sound effect needs an audio source component, and because this is a sound effect rather than background music, the spatial blend must be all the way to 3D. I do not want this to play at the start of the game. I don't want the gun to go off just by loading the game, so let's turn that off. But what I do want to do, I've already got a preset up weapons folder with some sound effects here, and I want it to have that sound effect ready but not playing by default. So let's pick one that looks good. I don't have any sound effects that are specifically rifle-like, but this one is pretty close. That'll do. Sounds a bit weedy for a Lee Enfield, but it'll do. So I'm going to drag and drop that in there. To prove that it doesn't play automatically, we shouldn't get that bang sound effect. Let's see if we do. Good so far. And then to actually have it play that sound effect, we're going to modify our shoot script to get the component, which is the audio source component, and to tell it to play when we pull that trigger. And you could, if you wanted to, use the skills that we've learned just with the play SFX script to say, don't just always play that one sound effect. Here's an array of weapon sound effects. They're all very similar, but I want them to be different, so we're not always playing the same sound effect, and that adds a surprising amount of detail. I'll leave that as an exercise for you, but we get this bit working first. We always want it to go we've hit a target, or only if that was an enemy, or only if that thing had a health script. Pulling the trigger, it should go bang. So every frame, if we press the left mouse button down, then we're going to get the component of type audio source. And what are we going to do to audio source? Well, we're going to tell it to play. Done. Get component of type audio source, play. Literally done. Because you've already set up the audio clip, the audio source already knows what its audio clip is. In this case, there's only one it can pick from. Let's make sure that works. My neighbours must be very confused. There you go. So if you follow this tutorial along, here's all the steps that we now have. We've used an audio source component for background music and sound effects, and demonstrated how you can get it to play on start, how we can randomize a sound effect, and we just finished how to get it to run in an existing script to play when an action is triggered. Well done, everybody. Make sure you can get it to work, and good luck with your first initial assessments coming up soon.